So, welcome everybody. I'm Janelle Moes. I'm the Advocacy Director with the AARP North Dakota, and this again is Advocacy Connect. It's something new that we're trying this year. It's quarterly meetings that we are using as an opportunity for volunteers like you to learn more about our advocacy work and identify ways that you can get involved. So, if you remember from the February call, we talked about the new cryptocurrency kiosk law and gave you some tips on what the law prescribes and also ways that you can help us identify and prevent fraud with those cryptocurrency ATMs. So this month we are covering, as you know, June 9th primary election is just weeks away. And we want to make sure that you know how to cast your ballot in this important election. Again, and we're focusing on how. We're not here to tell you who to vote for or what to vote for, but we're here to make sure that you have the information you need to make sure that you can cast your ballot in June. You can also find really important information on where, when, and how to vote by visiting our state election page, which is aarp.org/vote. But I'm super excited. Joining me today for this important discussion is a special guest. Our North Dakota Deputy Secretary of State, Sandy McMerty, is here to talk about the voting process, deadlines that you need to think about, and answer any questions that you have as you think about voting in June. So as always, I prepared questions for Sandy, but if you do have a question for her, go ahead and raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box. So with that, Sandy, do you want to introduce yourself, give folks some context about who you are and the work that the Secretary of State's office
Sure.
does?
Sure. So very excited to be here today. I'm Sandy McMerty. I serve as the Deputy Secretary of State for Secretary Michael Howe. Our office is obviously buzzing. We do elections every year. So even though we only have elections on the odd year in North Dakota, we're always busy with them. So this year, especially, I'm sorry, on the even year, this year, especially with the primary election coming up, our office is hopping. I like to remind Secretary of State Michael Howe always says the most important election is always the next election because every election helps make decisions that are important to how you live in your communities, the laws of the state, people who govern and look over the places that we live, work, and play. So very excited to be here today to help you all learn how to prepare to vote for the upcoming June 9th primary.
I was going to think Secretary House said it's his most favorite time of year, the most wonderful time of year, right? Election season. We also
Election
consider that
season.
going into the legislative session, right? It's the most wonderful time of year,
Wonderful
but some
time of
of
the
us
year.
thrive on different things. So you all thrive on elections right now.
Me
We
too.
tend to thrive during both election season, but also legislative session. So great. Well, welcome, and I'm so glad you're here. So to get us started, do you want to share some insights into how your office is helping voters prepare to vote in June?
Yeah, absolutely. So our office, along with local county auditors, are always the trusted source for information on elections. So we have many voter resources available on our website, which is vote.nd.gov. You can go onto that page. We have our My Voting Info portal. And essentially, you can do everything from apply for your absentee ballot. You can enter your address or your driver's identification number and find information about your polling location, the hours of that. You can actually see your ballot and look at it there. So you can use that to research the things you need to know coming into that primary. And if you follow us on our YouTube, social media, or other channels, we have lots of helpful videos related to voting. The site itself has lots of information about voting security, how to vote, what it's like to go to a polling location, and then those different ways you can vote that we'll talk about later today. But really looking across that full spectrum of how do we best get out the information to help everybody who wants to get out and vote be able to get to the polls and get their vote counted.
Wonderful. I think you said something that was important, the voting security piece. I think we hear and see and read a lot about that lately. Just anything that really you want to bring to the attention right now before we get digging into deadlines and different things about voting security in North Dakota?
Yeah, North Dakota has excellent voting security. So two of the things we hear most often are machines hooked to the internet and really questions about voter registration. And so North Dakota is not a voter registration state, but we have better laws in place than the National Voter Registration Act requires. Our voter registration or our voter ID law requires citizenship because you have to prove your citizenship with the North Dakota Department of Transportation to get an ID. So that is off the table. Very secure process. One source of information for your voting identification, which is really an excellent system. And from the standpoint of machines, no machine that touches a ballot ever is connected to the internet and has no components for that. So when you hear those accusations or rumors out there, just know those are not true. Our ballot tabulators, our ballot marking devices, none of those are connected to the internet. There is an internet connection that is a very secure internet connection that contains our poll pads, which contains no voting information. It's just your names. And so when you come into a polling location and check in on that poll pad, within 2 minutes, every other poll pad across the entire state of North Dakota knows that you have voted and are checked in to vote, which eliminates the possibility of you voting in another precinct or going on to do that. So it's a really secure, excellent system. Know that North Dakota's voter integrity is in a great place.
That's really helpful. Those two things I think we hear a lot about, and I think we read a lot about. So I think making sure that folks understand how we address elections in North Dakota is super important. So that's great. Okay, so we've talked about the primary election goes a little bit more quietly than the general election, but it's really a key election time for local officials. So city commissions, mayoral races, school boards, park boards. So if folks are really interested in digging into local elections, can you talk about a number of ways, that they can cast their ballot? Can you walk us through maybe what folks need to think about if they choose to vote absentee in North Dakota?
Yeah, absolutely. So North Dakota, we're very lucky. We have lots of different options for voting. And so we can choose the one that's most convenient for us, right? So individuals who want to vote absentee have to complete and submit an absentee ballot application to their county auditor. If you live in a vote by mail county, so North Dakota has over 30 counties that are vote by mail, all that means is every active voter in the county is mailed an absentee ballot application. And then they get to decide whether or not they want to vote by absentee and send that back and receive their ballot at home, or come to the polling location on election day and cast a ballot there. In all other counties, you have to contact the county auditor that you want to receive that absentee ballot. And you can visit our website, vote.nd.gov. You can fill out an absentee ballot application online there and simply print it and send it into your county auditor to receive that ballot. So that's one way you can do that. Very important thing to remember if you choose to vote absentee. Absentee ballots must be received by the close of polls on election day. So if you receive your ballot and you think you don't have time to mail that, because I know you can mail something in Bismarck and it takes 5 days to get to me in Bismarck. You can mail something in Watford City and it takes 2 days to get to Bismarck. So it just depends on the mailing time and what the U.S. Postal Service is doing at that point. If you are worried, our site does allow you to track your ballot to see if your county has received your ballot. And if you check on election day and say, oh my gosh, my ballot hasn't made it yet, you can go to the polling location and vote, even though you've mailed in your absentee ballot. Because whatever ballot, whether you're at the polling location or the absentee ballot is received first in red, you'll be marked as having voted and you won't be allowed to cast another ballot. So know that. Second option, there are 8 counties in the state that allow early voting. So you can go in that 10 days prior to the election day that allow you to vote. So that'll start in about a week or two here. And then always on election day, polling locations throughout your county. You can check where those polling locations are online on our website or with your county auditor and make sure that you can get there on election day.
That's excellent. I think you brought up a point in terms of the deadline. Is that new or different? You seem to stress that point a little bit in terms of making sure that the ballot is there by election day. So are there new deadlines that we should be aware of or something that has changed recently?
Yeah, so in the last legislative session in 2025, that law was changed slightly. So right now, the law as it stands today is that it has to be received by close of polls on election day. So all ballots must be received. The only exemption to that is federal UOCAVA ballots. They have to be cast by election day, but are allowed to be received after. That's the only, those are military ballots from overseas typically. So yes, it has to be received by close of polls. Prior to that, you had to have it postmarked the day prior to election day, and it had to be received before canvassing board. So you had to have it in the mail a day earlier, and then it had to be received before the canvassing board met. But that has been removed. Now all ballots, whether that's polling location, absentee, any of it has to be by close of polls on election day.
Okay. We really do make it very accessible and easy to vote,
Mhm.
making sure your voice is heard and your voice is counted. So I think it's great that you have both the absentee process, but outlining that early voting process
Yeah,
in those particular counties is essential.
yeah.
So ballot measures. I remember receiving something in the mail a couple of weeks ago about a ballot measure. Can you talk us through the ballot measures and where voters can learn more and why you're taking a more proactive role as a Secretary of State's office related to ballot measures in June? So.
Yeah. So first, let me address something that came out of the last legislative session. So during the last legislative session, Senator Jana Myrdal brought forward a bill that requested that the Secretary of State mail out educational information prior to election on ballot measures appearing on that ballot. So in late April, early May, you received a mailing, most likely if you're an active voter at your household, called Ballot Measure Education that outlined Measure 1 that's on the June primary ballot, which is seeking to limit constitutional amendments on measures brought through the election process to a single subject. So that type of information will come out prior to this election and the general election. There's funding in our budget to allow for that for this cycle, and then the legislature will determine whether or not that was a great idea and move forward with that. So for that measure I just talked about, that's the one that's on the primary ballot. That single subject measure will be decided there. In November, there's currently 3 constitutional measures slated to be on the ballot, but here's where it might get a little confusing. One of those measures is under review by the Supreme Court. So we might come to the general and have 3, or we might come to the general and have 2. We won't know that until the Supreme Court makes their decision between now and the general. So in November, Measure 1 right now is that the measure that is being considered by the Supreme Court. It seeks to repeal a law that prohibits the Legislative Assembly from proposing a constitutional measure relating to term limits. So that action, the Supreme Court's looking to whether or not the legislature had the right to bring that measure forward or not. If they decide, yep, it's okay, it will remain on the ballot as Measure 1. If they say, no, it is not, it will be removed and all ballots will move up, if that makes sense, or all measures will move up. So Measure 2 seeks to change the threshold to pass constitutional measures. Right now, when you vote on a measure on the statewide ballot, that's a constitutional measure, it needs a 50% simple majority to vote. This measure is seeking to change that to a 60% majority required for passage, which is just a slightly different voter number based on however many people vote in the election. So Measure 2 is for that. If Measure 1 would be gone, again, that would move up and become Measure 1. Measure 3 is the school lunch funding petition that was circulated earlier this year that was approved this past month. And that seeks to require the state to fund school lunches for public and charter schools, and then optionally allows for non-public and tribal schools if they would so choose. It charges the legislature to seek a source for that funding or directs it to use the legacy fund. So right now, those are the 3 that'll be coming on to the ballot. And one of the things that I find that I'm having to educate my kids and other people who vote, a lot of people don't know that those measures that appear on the ballot in that statewide area are constitution, they're changes to our constitution, and looking at it through that lens. So that's just something I like to reiterate. Like it's not just passage of law, it's typically something that is changing the constitution in some way.
Well, and education is so key, especially when it comes to the primary. Well, will the primary ballot look a little bit different? I know you mentioned Measure 1, which is the one that the legislature moved forward to put on the ballot in June, but there might also be local issues that are being addressed in the primary. So if I were to get my ballot, it's going to look a little bit different in the primary than it necessarily would look in the general election, right?
Absolutely. And there's going to be 2 things that are different. One, you might have 3 measures that are Measure 1. Measure 1, that's a constitutional measure. Measure 1 that the county brought forward related to a tax issue or a bond issue. You could have a city issue or a school issue. So you could have multiple Measure 1s on the ballot. So when you drive around and see those signs that say, vote for Measure 1, that's Measure 1 at the county or Measure 1 at the city. So that's one good distinction when you're working with folks to try and kind of mention that depending upon what's on your ballot, that's why it's really important to go out and go to vote.indy.gov, find your ballot, see what's on it, educate yourself with what those measures will be on your ballot. So you know when you come in, oh, why is there now 4 measures? I thought there was 1. Right. So double check that. The other thing that's different on a primary ballot that some voters are confused by and a little put off by is we are an open primary. So when you come in an open primary on the partisan races, you vote either all Democrat or all Republican. If there was another one, there was another column, you'd have to choose that as well. This year, it's just Democrat and Republican. So when you come in, you say, I'm going to vote Republican, I'm going to vote that, or I'm going to vote Democrat. If you cross over any of those votes, it invalidates your partisan portion of the ballot, but the rest of your ballot would count. So people get a little nervous, but you don't have to declare anything. You get your ballot, you go into your voting booth or at your kitchen table if you're voting absentee, you vote what you want in either of those one columns, not straying into the other. And then that just nominates those individuals to go on to the general election for final election.
Yeah, you covered a lot of great information there. I think it can be confusing going into the primary, especially,
Very.
needing to vote that way, but also the difference between the measures. But you did mention that all of that information is on your website. So if I wanted to know what measure one was, both on the statewide level, but also because I live here in Bismarck, all of that information is available for me to educate myself on your website, correct?
Yep. So you can get deeper information about all of the statewide ballot measure or constitutional measures on our site. You can access your ballot. So by putting in either your address or your driver's license information, it will find the ballot that's associated with your precinct and where you live. And when you review that ballot, you can see if there's any measures at the school, city, county level, in addition to that statewide one. And then that flyer I mentioned earlier that the state has sent out, if you're not an active voter and you didn't receive that, that is available on our website. It's on the homepage right now. You can click and go directly to that PDF to get that information.
Okay, great. So I've got one more question for you, and there might be others that might have questions for you too, but it's been a really rich discussion so far. So, but don't be shy, folks on the call. If you want to put your question in the chat, or I'll turn it over to you once I finish this last question. But dates, you've covered a few dates so far, but what are key dates that folks need to have in mind as they prepare for the primary election?
Yep. So again, that big date to remember is that all ballots need to be received by close of polls. So that's a change in that absentee process. So by the close of polls on June 9th, your ballot needs to be in to be counted. So just remember that if you don't have enough time for mailing, you can check online. If you have mailed it to see if it's come in, you can always go to the polling location and vote on election day, or you can go to the county office and drop it off there if you need to, if for any reason you think the mailing is not going to work and you have an absentee ballot in your house. There are currently those 8 counties I mentioned: Ward, Stark, Morton, Burleigh, Stutzman, Cass, Grand Forks, and Sioux County are all offering early voting in the days coming up to the election. You can check online on our website to find those times and dates if you'd like, or you can check with the county auditor. So that's a good thing and a convenience thing for people if it's hard for you to get to the polling location on election day. Know that across the state, when polling locations are open, every county, even if they're a vote by mail county, has to have one polling location open. So every county has different hours for polling locations. So be sure to check with your county office or on our website again for those hours of when your polling locations will be open. And then just kind of as a reminder, on election night, results will be unofficial results. That will move forward to the county canvassing board, and then the state canvassing board will certify those election results on the 15th of June after the election, and then they become official. So our site will let you see, we have a new election night results page that you'll see some new kind of functionality around. You'll be able to see if there's any contests that are eligible for recount and all of those things there too. So.
Great. Questions that folks might have. Oh, I see some in the chat. Hold on a second. All right. One question is, will our real ID driver's license be enough ID to vote?
So North Dakota has 4 documents that it will accept for voting. The first 2 are the ones that are most common: a North Dakota driver's license or a North Dakota non-driver ID. Both of those you have to prove citizenship to get. So whether it's a real ID or an ID with no star, non-real ID, they work for voting. The key piece for those 2 items is just to ensure that your address is up to date with your current address. That doesn't even mean you have to go into the DOT to get a new license. You can use, there's a place on our site that you can go to that, or you can go to DOT's website and you can actually just update your address online with them. And then when we look you up in our poll pads on election day, we see that you have a different address. We say, hey, have you recently updated your address? It lets us know all of that information. So you know you're voting in the right location. The two other forms of ID that are used are tribal IDs. So for our tribal citizens, they can use their tribal ID issued by their tribe. And then if you are a resident who resides in a long-term care facility, there's a special document that you can use to vote as a resident of a long-term care facility. So those four things, critically important. Very important note, the new digital IDs that you can get on your phone will not work for voting. They are not considered authentic for voting purposes. And so make sure you're coming to the polls with that hard copy ID.
Okay. Okay. You've covered a couple of questions. I know Alan did have a question about his real ID doesn't reflect his current residence, but he changed it with the ID office. But the polling office will know then
Yep.
that he's
within
changed that
within
address.
a day. So if the only time that is sometimes difficult is if you come to the polling location, you haven't updated your ID. Oh no, can I vote? Yes, you can. We'll basically ask you to change that on your phone. We'll have you log in and change that, and we'll have you show it to us because it will take 1 day for that to get to us. Our sync with the DOT happens overnight. So if anybody would change their license or change their address information on the day of election, we just ask them to show us that they have changed it on the DOT website so we have proof of that. But other than that, anytime you change it between now and then, all that information will be available to our poll workers on election day.
Okay, perfect. It's not a question, but a comment from someone. They found out the hard way. A picture of your North Dakota driver's license is not acceptable voter identification. That must be true?
That is very true. So just the same as that digital ID, we need the hard copy version of the ID to ensure that you are who you are at the polling location. The poll pad actually scans your information and pulls up your information based on that barcode you see on the back there. So it's you still have an opportunity to vote. So that's the other thing I would say. So let's say you find out the hard way. You show up at the polling location and you have a picture of your driver's license. You're not going to be turned away. They're going to ask you to vote set aside and cure that ballot with the county auditor before the canvassing board. So you would cast your ballot, they would put it in a set aside envelope, and all you would have to do is come to the county auditor either with, you could even copy it and email it to her as long as she sees it on a copy or a piece, or you can come into the office and show it to them. They will cure your ballot. The canvassing board will review it and it will be cast. So just know that if you don't have it on election day, you still have the opportunity to vote. You just have to have some steps afterwards to cure that.
Okay. Okay, I hadn't heard that. That's important because I would hate to get there and not and then feel, that
right.
you're
Or like the mom who ran out of the house. I gave my husband my ID because we went out for dinner and drinks this weekend, and now I don't have my ID, and here I am at the polling location. Right? Those instances do happen.
Yeah. Okay. Another question came in on information on law changes that might impact election judges or poll workers that might have happened in the last session.
Yeah, so the only major one that I can think of is if there is a election judge who is not doing their job or not being unbiased. So let's say you have an election judge who is telling voters that the machines are hooked to the internet or saying that a candidate is not actually on the ballot, you shouldn't vote for them. Acting outside of the way an election judge should act, county auditors can remove those individuals. That used to require an affidavit, where now county auditors have the ability to do that if a judge is not appropriately conducting under their code of conduct what they should be doing as an election judge.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Question came about, there seems to be difficulty recruiting election judges for the locations in Cass County. Lots of clerks are having to volunteer, but what are other thoughts about why it might be difficult to recruit folks for that?
So judges are typically, you have the political parties who are supposed to appoint individuals to work as judges at the polling locations. Some parties have lots of folks who do that. Some don't, depending upon the district, just depending on the organization of those individual districts. So I think judge sounds scary, right? It sounds like you have a big job and you're judging things, but really it's ensuring that the election is run well, that the practices and protocols are followed. You're making sure that those ballots have initials on them from the judges, from the poll workers, those types of things. So I think Counties, if you're interested in being a judge, let them know because county auditors do have to fill those positions if they're not filled outside of the districts from the different political parties.
Okay, okay. Really, really excellent questions.
Yeah.
Folks, keep them coming if you have them. We don't want to keep Sandy too long. It's really been a pleasure having you on the call. I think important, information is really key in terms of voting, making sure you understand what's on the ballot, who's on the ballot. I know our office and your office will never tell people
Yeah.
how to vote, but I think having information is so essential to really preparing yourself to get there. But a rundown of allowed political advertising near the voting location. That has changed recently.
Participant JL knows their stuff. These are good questions. All
Yeah.
right. So, political advertising near the voting location. A lot of people freak out about political signs being out on lawns on election day. That is now allowed under North Dakota law. Once upon a time, it was not, but that is allowed. So, no election signs have to come down outside of polling locations. So, that really depends upon one, the polling location, and two, city or county ordinances. If your city has any ordinances about signs in the boulevard, that might restrict that, that's a question for your city. Certain polling locations, so I'll use an example. I'm in Bismarck. Century Baptist Church is often used. It's in North Bismarck as a polling location. Because it is a religious facility, it is a 501c4, they are restricted from doing anything political. So political signs are not allowed on their property. So while you might see a political sign somewhere close to another property, but not another, remember sometimes that could be related to that particular building status because elections aren't conducted in all government buildings. We have to use community buildings as well. Any type of political signage outside of, if allowed, outside, or even if you have somebody doing like exit polling or talking to people as they come to vote, that has to be done 100 feet away from the entrance to the polling location. So let me give you an example. If you're using a school building and it's in a classroom down the hall, it's 100 feet from the door of the classroom down the hall, not 100 feet from the building door entrance. So those are the major kind of overarching things that kind of come up on election day. The other big one would be if you have a favorite hat that has your candidate on it, if you have a pin that touts a candidate, if you have a t-shirt that says something political on it, you will be asked to remove that from the polling location. That's not allowed. It's electioneering. It's against North Dakota law. So that's just a really simple thing. If somebody comes in and they ask you to remove your hat, it's not because they want to be belligerent. It's because it's part of the law. You can't be electioneering for any one candidate or another in the polling location. If you have a pin that says vote, totally okay. You're not promoting a candidate. But if you are promoting a candidate or a particular political party, that is considered electioneering in the polling location.
I think those are two very important distinctions, both around the signs, but also, what you can and cannot wear. I think that's important. One other question: what percent of registered voters are casting their vote in primary elections and general elections? Do you keep those statistics at the Secretary of State's office? That's interesting. We were just having that discussion in our office because AARP does, collect and gather information related to voters 50 and older in the general election, but we haven't been able to find some most recent data related to the primary election. But what does the office do to improve? Do you focus on voter turnout as the Secretary of State's office? Do you track some of those statistics and share in terms of who is voting when?
Yeah, we absolutely track statistics. Overall in North Dakota, let me just double check my quick statistics for us here so I make sure I have the right numbers. So looking at 2022, we had about 40% in the general and under 20 in the primary. So what I will tell you also is midterm elections are also very low. So midterm means we do not have a presidential candidate or we only have one in North Dakota federal office on the ballot this year. A lot of people feel like, nope, the most important election is the presidential election. That's the only year I vote. We would tell you that's not the case, right? Your elections, your primaries specifically, are electing the people who make the most decisions that impact you directly. Your city commission, your school districts, your counties. Those people are running your government where you live. Not that the other election isn't important, where the president or the governor are on the ballot, but every election is important because it elects the leaders who help you and your community grow. So while we don't particularly promote voter voter involvement from a standpoint of education and why you should vote and why it's important to vote in a civics environment, that's really what we do. We look to improve voter turnout by helping educate citizens why it's so important to vote. Every election, incredibly important to vote. But yeah, we'd love to see Secretary Howell speak. Like under 20% is a sad number. That's a sad number. We as a state should be turning out for our primaries, making sure the right people are we want to lead us in our communities are elected, and that's where we're often doing it.
Yeah, and we also focus on that too, really encouraging folks to get out, to encourage their neighbors and their friends, giving them the tools and resources that they need. And I think that was part of one of the questions is what can folks do as citizens to encourage or improve and help
Yeah.
get people out to the vote? And I think you've given folks many tools today to do
Yeah,
that.
and if I can just say the other thing that I would add to that is work an election. If you have questions about your election, if you're not sure about something that happens in elections, work the election. It's a great way to see all the processes, all the checks, balances, and security measures that are taken to make sure that we are doing everything we can. And North Dakotans run North Dakota elections. This isn't people from outside your city. It's your friends, it's your neighbors, it's your aunt, it's your mom, right? Your uncle's there. Go see them. Go work the election, volunteer to be a poll worker, reach out to your county offices. As one of our participants said, finding people to work elections is important. So if you have time, absolutely do that.
Okay, we'll take one final question. There has been some really great questions today. What does the future voting look like in North Dakota for rural voters? And is voting on the internet ever something that you foresee coming to our state?
Yeah, so obviously we talked today about the many ways that North Dakota makes voting convenient. We have a lot of options as voters in North Dakota, and it's not one day that we have to be there to vote. We have an opportunity to vote before the election through absentee, early voting, those other things. Um, I don't believe that the voting is moving to the internet. Secretary Howe will tell you the same thing. Those checks and balances aren't there. The opportunity for bad actors to influence things is way different. Our machines are not connected to the internet. Your ballots are paper ballots. Even when you use the ballot marking device, the express votes, they're awesome. They have paper ballots. So North Dakota's vote is trackable. It's not ever going to be sucked up into the internet and be influenced by anybody because it can't, because there's nothing touching it. So I know a lot of people would like the convenience of that, but I think look to the convenience you already have. Anybody who's not voting is not voting because they're making a choice. It's not because they didn't have the opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. I mean, it's been a very rich conversation. We don't want it to end here. So, again, thank you, Sandy, for joining us. Do you have any final comments that you want to make? I mean, you've really covered everything from ballots to deadlines to where folks can get information. What are the measures that are on the ballot? But just any closing statements that you have.
Yeah, I would just encourage you if you have other questions, don't be afraid to reach out to us. Check out vote.indy.gov, vote.indy.gov. Our website has voter resources, flyers you can share with people, information for candidates, candidate handout resources where what can you or can you not do in a campaign. So from the full breadth of kind of that experience, whether you're on the voting side or running for office, there's so much information out there. Please help guide people there. If you want to give us a call, our number is 701-328 4146 gets you right to our election team. Or if you want to email SOS elect, ELECT at nd.gov. Happy to answer any questions. We get lots of great ones, and we just love it when voters and citizens are trying to educate themselves and better understand the options that are available to them.
Wonderful. Thank you again. And you can also find information about the upcoming June election at our website too, aarp.org/vote. And just a reminder that AARP is a nationwide nonprofit that helps people 50 and older live the life they choose. As a member and a volunteer, you help support AARP's important national and local efforts, including protecting Social Security, helping people avoid fraud, lowering prescription drug costs, Membership can also bring you real savings on things like dining, travel, gas, which matters more than ever in today's soaring prices. So again, we really appreciate everyone's time and participation today. This was recorded and we will send it out so you can watch it later and share it with your friends. So thank you again and have a great afternoon.